Alright, so hello and welcome to the video, and in this episode we are looking at the Python implementation to the 9618 variant 4.1 summer, or is it winter 2024. Okay, so without further ado, let's actually go ahead and look at the first question here. Actually, I think in this video just looking at question 1, so we'll just be looking at question 1 so that the video is not too long. So let me just close out of my File Explorer in my text editor, then zoom in so that you can see the code a bit better. Alright, so it says here that we are going to be making use of the data.txt file, and as it happens, it's going to be used in this particular question, that is question 1, as it were. So a program sorts string data using different sorting methods. Part A says here that the text file data.txt stores string data items. Each data item is on a new line in the text file, so that is an important piece of information that you are being given right there. So the function read data is going to do the following. It's going to have a local array of strings that can store 45 items. Then it's going to read each line of data and store it in the array. Then it's going to return the array. So our task here is to write function code for the function called read data for 6 marks. So let's actually go ahead and look at the implementation that I have going on right here. Maybe before we do, let's just go ahead and take a sneak peek into the data.txt file. So let me just collapse everything here. Then this is November 2024. So you can see that this is the data.txt file, right? We have about 45 items, color names as it were, that are stored as strings inside of this data.txt file. So here we are going to have to write code for the function read data that does those three things that we have just read there. So let's go ahead and look at my implementation. So you see that I have the implementation of the read data function from lines 2 through 18. So here you can see that we have the function declaration, right? If you look closely, our function is not taking any arguments, or it doesn't have any parameters. So we just have a type definition, a function definition rather, on line 2. Then notice that I'm making use of comments, right, to describe what's happening, or rather what's going on with my code. And this is particularly very important if you are writing Python. I think they mention it somewhere in the paper, that if you are using Python, you need to make use of comments. It's mentioned somewhere, I think. If you read the paper, if I'm not mistaken, it should be mentioned. But anyway, so here we have making use of comments, right? And you also notice that on line 4 we have the array declaration. It's going to store 45 items, so I'm making use of the multiplication sign to declare an array that's going to assign empty strings, as it were. Then I'm going to initialize the count to 0, because remember that we are going to make use of the count to iterate through each line of code, to iterate through each element in the file, as it were. So that's why we have count going on there. Then we are making use of exception handling, right? Try except in order to handle any error that might arise when you are trying to read from the text file. Then we are opening the file on line 8, then reading each line from the file from lines 9 to 14, rather lines 9 to 12. That's what we are doing. We are reading each line from the file. Then you notice that on line 11 we are making use of the strip function, is it? So that we can, let me just over this strip method, and it should tell us what it does. So it's going to remove any leading or trailing white space, is it, after reading that line. So that's what we are doing there. After which we are going to store that inside of the data array at the position count. Then we are incrementing count by 1 every time we read a particular item. Then we increment the count by 1, so that when our loop moves on to the next iteration, or to the next element it is reading, our count will also move the data array to the next index, as it were. Then if we have nothing to read, we are just going to break out of the loop, and essentially that's what we are doing here. Then at the very end we are simply retaining the data array. So this code right here is what's going to award you 6 marks in Python, right? So we are just going to go ahead and copy this and paste it inside of the evidence document. So that's the last bit of it before we move on to part B. So part B says here that the function format array takes an array of strings as a parameter. It concatenates the contents of the array into one string with a space between each array element. The function returns the concatenated string. So we are to write the program code for format array for 2 marks, right? You see that we don't have anything fancy going on, right? For 2 marks, you can actually, it's a giveaway to how much thinking you're supposed to put towards the question. And in this particular instance, we don't have to think a lot, because we are going to take a string, an array of strings as a parameter. Then we are going to concatenate all the contents of those of that particular array is one large string. Then we are going to return that concatenated string. So the way I did it here was to make use of the join function in Python. So what we are doing is we are concatenating a white space plus the item that is contained inside of the particular array. So you see that this notation right here that I'm using here, we are saying that for an item that is inside of the array, if the item is not equal to an empty string, then we just want to concatenate it with this string right here. Then we retain that as a long string. So essentially this notation that I have going on here is just a short form of using a for loop, is it? Joining a for loop together with an if statement, right? So here we're saying that for an item that is inside of an array, if it is not an empty string, then we want to join it with this string and return that as a one long concatenated string as required by the question. But of course you can do a different implementation altogether, but this is the way that I did it in this particular instance. Then moving on to item number 2, we have the main program that's going to call read data and also call format array. So the way I did it was to have my main method down here, right? Then you see that I'm using this funny looking notation on line 69 to 70. So essentially what this does is that it's going to allow it's going to make it so that our script is not going to be executed accidentally when loaded, right? This is the standard Python convention. If you are going to write a script that you would want to invoke manually or by yourself, right, you are going to make use of this notation that you see on line 69. So it says here that if __ name _ is equal to main, then we are going to run main, is it? So in the event that you are going to import this script into another script, right, it's not going to be executed, or it's not going to be run automatically, right? It's only going to be run when you call the main method. Essentially that's what we are doing here. So you can just go ahead and just copy it as it is, right? If you don't or rather if you don't want to, you can just leave it. But this is the standard way of doing things in Python. If you have a program that's going to have a main method, you want to make sure that you use this notation on line 69 to 70. Again, remember, this just ensures that our script is not going to be run automatically when we load it from another script or when we import it from another script, as it were. So inside of the main method, we are going to call read data, and we are also going to call format array. So here for B item 2, it's contained inside of here. So we are going to call read data, right, and stores the returned array. So we are storing that array inside of this data variable, right, which is essentially an array, because remember, read data returns an array. So we are going to store it inside of this data array. Then we are also going to call format array with the returned array and outputs the returned string. So we are going to pass now this data on line 55 as an argument to the format array function. Then we are going to store it inside of a variable called formatted, which is going to store that very long string of concatenated color names that we would have created using the format array function. Then we are simply going to go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document. Then on line 2, we are going to test our program. So let me just go ahead and open the console and run this script. So okay, there we go. I think I'm in the wrong folder, so let me change to, this is November 2024. I'm looking right here where it says November 2024. So we want to cd change directory to November 2024, and now we are in November 2024. You can actually see that we are in the correct directory right here, right? So I'm just going to invoke the Python interpreter by typing Python, then question one, I'll make sure I type that correctly. Question one, then this is November 2024 .py. Then you can see that what we have going on is we have that original data string right here, string literal that we would have given, is it? So we are going to have the original data, then we are going to have the formatted data, is it way. So you can ignore this other output down here because that's for the later part of the question, but essentially just focus on this part. This is the concatenated string that we are getting from the format array function when we call it right here on line 61. Rather, when we print what it is returned on line 61 there. Then so you would go ahead and copy, take a screenshot of this output. You can press Windows Shift and S so that you can take a screenshot of a controlled area. Then you paste that inside of your evidence document, as it were. Then part C says here that the function compares strings, takes two strings as parameters, then compares each string one character at a time to identify which string comes first alphabetically. If the first two characters are the same, the second character of each string is compared. This continues until the two strings are different. So the function is going to return 1 if the first parameter comes before the second alphabetically. Otherwise, it's going to return 2 if the second parameter comes before the first alphabetically. So we have to write code for the function compare strings that's going to do all these things that are mentioned here. So you can assume that all strings are in lowercase. Assume that a difference between two strings will always be identified before the end of one string. This is another important piece of data that we are being, another important piece of information that we are being given here. So do not use an inbuilt string comparison function. Again, this is important. It's important that you follow this instruction because here it says that you have to do, you must, where does it say? Carry out every instruction in this in each task, is it? So if they say do not do something, make sure you do not do it, is it? You should avoid doing things that have been indicated that you should not do. So we are going to write the compare strings function for 4 marks. So let's go ahead and look what we have going on here. So we have the compare strings function. Where do I have it? On lines 26 through 38, right? That's where I have the compare strings function. So it's going to take two string parameters, right? So we have string 1 and string 2 as the parameters right there. Then we want to compare two strings character by character, then return 1 if string 1 comes first alphabetically. Otherwise, we want to return 2 if string 2 comes first alphabetically. So what we are doing is we are making use of the minimum function right here. So we are checking the minimum length. Basically, we want to check which string is shorter on line 32. Then we store that returned length inside of this min length variable. Then what we are doing on line 33 is we want to iterate for as long as the shortest string, right? For as long as the shortest string, meaning to say that let's say the first string was let's open the data.txt file just for context. Let's look at this color code JDZ, and let's say we have this string called lavender. So what we want to do is we want to compare these strings for the length of 4, is it? Because remember, this is the shortest string and this is the longest string. So it wouldn't make sense to compare these two strings for how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. For a length of 8, is it? Because Jade only runs for a length of 4. So you just want to compare for the shortest, for as long as the shortest string, is it well? So that's why we have this functionality going on, right? We just want to compare for the length of the shortest string. Basically, that's what we want to do. So if the string, that is, if the character at position 1 is less than the character at position 1, position I rather. Remember, position I is going to be 1 in the first run, is it? We want to return 1. Otherwise, we are going to return 2 if the character in the first index position is greater than the character at the first index position for the second string, is it? In which case, we are going to return 2. Otherwise, let's say we have the same name for both strings. We are just going to return 1. That is what we are doing on line 38. Let's say we are comparing Jade and Jade, is it? So we are just going to return 1. So that's what we are doing with the compare strings method right there. So essentially, you realize that we would have satisfied both of these two sets of conditions, right? We are taking parameters, we are comparing, then we are returning. So taking parameters, comparing, then returning values. Then you would have to go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document. Then you can move on to the next part. Moving on to part D. So the function bubble takes an array of strings as a parameter and sorts the data into ascending alphabetical order using a bubble sort. Again, this is where it's important to make sure that you know how to implement those algorithms that you do for this particular course. So in this particular question, we are supposed to implement a bubble sort. So the bubble sort uses compare strings to compare each string. The function returns the sorted list. Write program code for bubble. So we want to write program code for the bubble function. Again, look at the number of marks right here. It simply tells you that there's not much thinking that you need to do, is it? There's not much thinking that you're supposed to do for 3 marks. So you shouldn't spend too much time with this one. So let's go ahead and look at what implementation I have going on here. So lines 41 through 52, that's where I have my bubble sort function. So what we are supposed to do is we are going to sort array using bubble sort with custom string comparison. So the string comparison that we are making use of is, remember, we are making use of our compare strings function right here, is it? So what we are doing is we are implementing our bubble sort. So we have 2 loops. Remember, for a bubble sort, you are going to make use of 2 loops. So here we have that's where we have the 2 loops, lines 48 to lines 51. So we are comparing to see if, using the compare strings method, right? We are comparing to see if, remember what they said here, that the compare strings method, right? What it does is that it's going to compare strings one at a time to identify which string comes first alphabetically. So that's what we are doing right here on lines 50 to 51 by making use of the compare strings function. So having done that, we are going to return the sorted array, is it? Then again, I'm not really going to explain much going on here because by now you should know how to implement a bubble sort in your chosen programming language. So lines 44 to 51, we are just making use of a bubble sort algorithm, right, to sort our array of string data. But instead of using bubble sort exclusively, we are making use of the compare strings function that we have written earlier on. Again, so just look at how these questions they build on top of each other. So in part C, you're supposed to write compare strings. Then in part D, you're now supposed to make use of that function called compare strings. Then after writing code for the bubble sort, we move on to call. Rather, we are supposed to call bubble and we are supposed to call format array inside of the main method. Then we are going to go down in the main method and you can see the implementation for part D right here. So sorted data is holding, we are calling bubble on the data array. Then maybe let me just mention what I did here. I made use of this copy function that is built into Python. The reason why I did that is because I just wanted to have the original data for the original data that was returned by the read data function, right? So I have a copy of that. Then I'm calling bubble sort by passing that copy as an argument to the bubble sort algorithm, rather function, then storing that result inside of the sorted data function right here, a variable, sorted data variable. After which we are going to call format array and pass sorted data as an argument and store that inside of this sorted formatted variable. After which we are simply going to print that sorted formatted data. Then it says that you should test your program and take a screenshot of the output. Then we are just simply going to go ahead and output that data on line 66, but we need to run our script right here. So let me just run it one more time so that you can see what we have going on. Alright, so you can see here that the sorted data is now amber, aqua, azure, beige, black, bronze, and so forth and so on. And initially the data is not sorted, but after running bubble sort as well as printing the sorted data, we now have the data sorted for this particular question. So I think this is the end of question 1. So that's just about it for question 1. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask in the comments, and then I will be sure to reply to those questions. But other than that, I think that's just about it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.